For the last 8 months, I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself a good father makes sacrifices. I told myself that moving into the spare bedroom of my own son's house was temporary, that it was just until things settled down, that family was worth the discomfort. What I didn't tell myself, what I couldn't admit yet, was that my son-in-law had already won. And he knew it. He just didn't know about the folder on my laptop, the one I'd been adding to, quietly, for 6 of those 8 months. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county of Maricopa, Arizona. I raised 2 kids in a 4-bedroom house in Chandler that my late wife Patricia and I bought in 1997 for $186,000. I paid it off in 2018. Free and clear, no mortgage, no liens, nothing. Just mine. Patricia passed from ovarian cancer in 2021. That was the worst year of my life. And I say that having lived through plenty of bad years. After she was gone, the house felt like it had too many rooms. My daughter Renee called me almost every day that first year. My son Marcus called maybe once a week. That's just how they've always been. Renee is her mother's daughter, warm and present. Marcus is more like me before I learned better. Quiet. Keeps his distance. Renee had been living in Tempe with her husband Derek for about 2 years when Patricia died. I'd met Derek maybe 4 times before the wedding. He seemed fine, polished, the kind of man who has a firm handshake and a compliment ready for every occasion. But you can never quite remember what he actually said afterward. About 8 months after Patricia's funeral, Renee called and asked if she and Derek could move in with me for a while. Just temporarily. Derek had left a sales job to start a business, some kind of logistics consulting thing I never fully understood, and they needed to cut expenses while he got it off the ground. Their lease was ending. It made sense, she said. The house was too big for just me anyway. I said yes because she was my daughter, and because she was right, and because I missed having someone in the house. They moved in on a Saturday in April. I helped them carry boxes. The first 3 months were fine. Better than fine, honestly. Renee cooked a few nights a week, and we'd eat together at the kitchen table, which I hadn't done with another person since Patricia got too sick to sit up for long. Derek worked from the 2nd bedroom during the day and was mostly pleasant in the evenings. He liked football and craft beer and talking about real estate as an investment concept, which I had no strong opinions about. I had the master bedroom. That was my room. Had been my room since 1997. Patricia's reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I hadn't moved them. The first time Derek mentioned the room, I thought he was joking. We were watching a game, Cardinals versus Rams, I think, and he made some comment about how his home office setup was cramped, that the spare bedroom wasn't really big enough for 2 monitors and the proper desk. He said it casually, the way you might mention the weather. The master bedroom's got a lot of square footage, he said, just as an observation. I looked at him. He was looking at the television. It does, I said. That was it. I didn't think about it again that night. But Derek, I would learn, was a man who planted seeds and then waited to see what grew. About 6 weeks later, Renee sat down with me at breakfast and said Derek's business was starting to get some traction. He brought on 2 clients. He needed a more professional setup, a real workspace he could potentially take video calls from. She said it with the careful tone of someone who has practiced the conversation beforehand. She asked if I'd considered moving into the spare bedroom. I put my coffee down. I looked at my daughter, who had her mother's eyes, and in that moment, her mother's way of looking slightly to the left when she was uncomfortable. This is my house, Renee, I said. I know that, Dad. I own it. My name is on the deed. Your mother and I paid for it for 21 years. Derek just thought, I'm sure he did. She didn't push it. She got up and poured her coffee out, even though it wasn't finished, and she went upstairs. That night, Derek didn't come down for dinner. The next day, He was cheerful again. That was the thing about Derek. He never seemed to hold a grudge. He moved through the house like someone who was always slightly more comfortable in it than you expected, like he'd already mentally redecorated it. He asked me about my old engineering projects at dinner. He laughed at my jokes. He offered to mow the lawn. I watched him, and I thought, this isn't over. I was right. The requests shifted after that, not about the bedroom anymore. Derek was smarter than that. Instead, it was smaller things. Could they use the garage for storage? Their stuff was getting cramped. Could Renee repaint the guest bathroom? She had a vision for it. Could I maybe take my meals at a different time on Wednesdays? Derek had a standing quiet call and the kitchen noise carried. Each one was reasonable. Each one was small. Each one was small. Each one moved the edges of the house a little further from me. My friend Raymond. We worked together at the county for 15 years, still meet for coffee every other Tuesday. He's the one who finally said it out loud. Gerald, he said, putting his mug down, that man is trying to own your house without buying it. I told him he was being dramatic. He gave me the look he used to give junior engineers who got their calculations wrong. I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for about 10 minutes. Then I went inside and I started paying closer attention. Here's what I noticed. Once I started looking, Derek had begun referring to things in the house as ours in conversations I could overhear on the phone with his friends, sometimes on his business calls. He mentioned living in a great property in Chandler more than once. When a neighbor came over to return a dish, Derek answered the door and gave a little tour of the backyard, pointing out the orange trees Patricia had planted, talking about them like he'd had a hand in it. One afternoon, I came home from Raymond's earlier than expected and found Derek sitting at the kitchen table with a man I didn't recognize, paperwork spread out between them. Derek introduced him quickly. This is Mike. He does real estate appraisals, and said they were just catching up. Mike left within 5 minutes of my arrival. I asked Derek what that was about. He said Mike was an old friend and they'd just been talking, nothing serious. I nodded. I went to my room. I opened my laptop and I started a folder. I called it House Stuff. Not very creative, but it wasn't meant to be. The next 6 months I kept notes. Dates, conversations, names. I wrote down the appraisal visit. I wrote down the day Renee mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Derek had looked into what it would take to add her name to the deed for security, she said, in case something happened to you. I wrote down the evening Derek brought up, for the first time directly, whether I'd considered what I wanted to do with the house long term. A property like this, he said, swirling his beer, in this market, with the right setup, could be generating income. Or you could pull a lot of equity out. Have we thought about that? I'm 63, Derek, I said. The house is paid off. Why would I pull equity out? He smiled. Just thinking about your options. Your future. I smiled back. That's kind of you. I added it to the folder when I went to bed. I also did something else. About 4 months into keeping notes, I called a real estate attorney named Carol Chen, who a woman from my church had recommended. I explained the situation. She listened for a long time without interrupting, which is how I knew she was good. She told me I needed to understand something clearly, as long as my name was the only one on the deed and I was not incapacitated. No one could do anything with that house without my consent. But she also told me to be careful, because people find ways to apply pressure that isn't legal, but also isn't criminal. She said what I was describing was a slow form of coercion, and that the best protection I had was documentation. Keep writing things down, she said. I told her I already was. We talked for an hour and a half. I paid her consultation fee by credit card, and it was the best money I'd spent in a long time. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in November. Renee came to me with something in her hands. It was a piece of paper, folded in thirds, the way you fold a letter. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she slid it across. It was a deed transfer form. She said Derek had found a way for them to qualify for a business loan, but the lender wanted collateral, and the house was the most significant asset available. She said it would just be a temporary lien. They'd have it paid off within 3 years, and after that, the plan was for all three of us to stay here, maybe build out the backlot eventually. She said Derek had it all figured out. She said she believed in him. She said, "Dad, this is our chance. We just need you to trust us." I looked at the paper. I looked at my daughter. "Where did Derek get this form?" I asked. She hesitated. "He had it drawn up." "By who?" Another pause. "A paralegal he found online." I folded the paper back into thirds. I picked it up. I held it. "Renee," I said, "I love you. You know that. Dad. And I need you to hear me very clearly." I set the paper down in front of her. "I am not signing this." Her face changed. I'd seen that face before, not on her, but on Derek. That flicker when something doesn't go the way the plan requires. She said Derek was going to be very disappointed. I said I was sorry to hear that. That night, Derek came home late. I was in the living room reading. He came in, set his keys down louder than necessary, and sat in the armchair across from me. He didn't turn on the TV. He just sat there until I looked up. "I think we need to talk about the future of this arrangement," he said. I closed my book. "I've been very patient," he said. "I've been respectful. I've given this time, but Renee and I can't build anything here if you're going to block every opportunity we try to create." I said I hadn't blocked anything. I'd simply declined to put my paid-off home up as collateral for a loan. He talked for a while after that. He talked about vision and about partnership and about how in today's market you have to take calculated risks, and how I came from a different generation that didn't understand leverage. He said the house was going to sit here doing nothing either way, so why not let it work for the family? He talked like he was pitching a client. When he finished, I said, "Derek, whose name is on the deed to this house." He said, "Yours. Currently." I picked my book back up. He sat there for another moment, then went upstairs. I called Carol the next morning. I described the deed transfer request, the word "currently," all of it. She told me I had enough documentation at this point to do what I needed to do. We talked through my options. I told her which one I wanted. She said she'd have the paperwork ready within 2 weeks. I told no one. The next 4 weeks, I went about my life. I had coffee with Raymond. I went to church on Sundays. I had dinner with Renee and Derek like nothing was different. I listened to Derek talk about his clients, his plans, the market. I answered questions about my days. I was pleasant. I was also, during that time, quietly having several things put in order. I had Carol set up a living trust with the house as the primary asset. My name, my control, my terms. The trust named Marcus as the secondary trustee and my 2 grandchildren as eventual beneficiaries, with very specific language about who could and could not direct the property during my lifetime. Carol explained every word to me and I read it twice before I signed. I also reached out to a property management company in Chandler, just to ask some questions, just to understand what my options were. And I put a deposit on a 1-bedroom apartment at a 55-plus community in Scottsdale. Nice place. Pool. They had a woodworking shop, which I'd been wanting to get back into since I retired. The apartment had a balcony that looked out over the McDowell Mountains. I signed the lease on a Thursday. I told them on a Sunday. Renee was making breakfast. Derek was at the table with his phone. I sat down, poured myself coffee, and waited until they were both settled. I said I had some news. I told them I'd done a lot of thinking about the future, mine and theirs. I told them I'd come to understand that this arrangement wasn't working. Not really, not for any of us. I told them I loved Renee, and I wanted her to be happy, and I believed that sometimes love means being honest about what isn't sustainable. Derek started to say something. I held up one hand. I told them the house had been placed in a living trust. I told them the trust had specific terms. I told them I'd consulted with a real estate attorney and everything was in order. I told them they were welcome to have their own attorney review the documents and that I had copies available. I told them I was moving out at the end of the month. Derek said, "Where are you going?" I told him about the apartment in Scottsdale. He said, "And what happens to this house?" I took a sip of my coffee. I looked at him. I said, "I've engaged a property management company. They'll be listing it as a rental. The income goes into the trust. I'll have Carol send you the contact information so you can discuss your move-out timeline with them directly. They're very professional." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Renee said, "Dad." I said, "The management company will need vacant possession by the end of next month. That's 60 days. That's enough time." Derek's jaw was doing something it hadn't done before, at least not where I could see it. He said, "You're serious?" I said, "Derek, I've been serious for a long time. You just weren't looking." I moved on a Saturday, same as they had. Raymond and his son helped me with the furniture. It didn't take long. I hadn't taken much, just what I actually needed. The bedroom set. Patricia's chair from the living room, the good one with the blue fabric she picked out in 2015. My books. My tools. The apartment was smaller than the house by about 2,000 square feet. It took me about 3 days to stop feeling like the walls were close. After that, I started to notice other things. The quiet was mine. The kitchen looked the way I left it. Nobody rearranged the living room or asked me to eat at different times or introduced strangers to the appraisal value of my backyard. The woodworking shop in the building had a lathe. I hadn't used a lathe since 1994. I went down there on my 4th evening and introduced myself to a man named Phil who was making a jewelry box for his granddaughter. We talked for 2 hours. He invited me back the next day. Renee called me about 3 weeks after I moved out. She was staying with a friend in Phoenix, she said. She and Derek had found a place, an apartment in Mesa, not far from where she worked. She said the rent was manageable. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I didn't know he'd talked to an appraiser, Dad. The day you came home, I didn't know he'd done that without telling me." I told her I believed her. She said Derek's business wasn't going the way he'd described. She'd found some things out. She said she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do. I told her whatever she decided. I was her father, and that wasn't going anywhere. She cried a little. So did I, honestly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. We've had coffee 3 times since then, just her and me. She's seeing the therapist. She's asking good questions about her own life, which is all I ever really wanted for her. Not answers, just the right questions. Derek sent me an email in January. Subject line was blank. It was 3 paragraphs about how I had acted in bad faith, how I had sabotaged his business, how he intended to explore his legal options. I forwarded it to Carol. She sent back a single sentence. "He has no claim. Keep the email on file." I haven't heard from Derek since. The house rented in 11 days. Young couple, both teachers. They sent me a photo last month of a garden they'd started along the back fence, right where Patricia's orange trees used to be. They asked if it was okay that they'd planted tomatoes. I wrote back and told them Patricia would have loved that. I'm sitting on my balcony right now, the one that looks out over the McDowell Mountains. It's 6:30 in the morning and the light is doing that thing it does in Arizona in early spring, that dusty gold that makes everything look like it's been here forever and isn't going anywhere. I have my coffee. I have my bow. In an hour, I'm going to go down to the woodworking shop and work on a cabinet I've been building. Somebody asked me recently if I regret letting it get as far as it did. If I regret opening my home in the first place. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I said no, because Renee needed to see it too. Not just what Derek was, but what she was allowing, what she'd been willing to ask of me. She needed to see it clearly, without me telling her. And she did. She saw it when she found out about that appraiser. She saw it when Derek couldn't explain where the money had gone. She's still seeing it, I think, 1 therapy session at a time. And I needed to see something too. I needed to see that a man can be patient and quiet and still have a line, that loving your children doesn't mean handing them the deed to your life. Patricia used to say that the most dangerous word in a family is temporary, because temporary is how things start, not how they end. She was almost always right. I should have listened sooner, but I listened eventually, and that's what mattered. The light is changing now, going from gold to something brighter and more ordinary. The mountains don't care. They've been there since before any of us made our plans. I pick up my coffee. I go back to my book. I'm home. I've thought a lot about the word patience since all of this happened. People use it like it's a passive thing. Like patience means you're just waiting, just absorbing, just enduring. But what I lived through with Derek taught me that real patience is active. It's paying attention. It's keeping a folder on your laptop and adding to it quietly for 6 months while someone at your dinner table mistakes your silence for weakness. Derek was smart. I'll give him that. He didn't come in loud. He came in with firm handshakes and compliments and beer and a way of talking about the family's future that made his plans sound like generosity. That's how people like Derek operate. Not with force, but with friction. Slow, constant, barely noticeable friction. Until one day you look around and realize the walls of your own home have been moved 3 inches in every direction, and none of it happened in a single moment you could point to. What I learned is that there's a difference between being kind and being a pushover, and for a long time I confused the two. I let things go because I loved Renee. I made allowances because I didn't want to be the kind of father who made his daughter's life harder. That's not wrong, exactly, but I took it too far. I let "I love you" become a reason to not say "this is not acceptable," and those two things are not in conflict. You can love someone completely and still hold a line. You can be a good father and still say "not this, not my house, not while I'm standing in it." The consequences Derek faced weren't punishment I designed. They were just the natural result of his own choices catching up with him. He spent 2 years treating a man's home like an asset to be acquired, treating a man's daughter like a vehicle for that acquisition, and treating patience and quiet like they were the same thing as surrender. He was wrong on all three. When the trust documents were signed and the management company was contacted and the lease in Mesa was the only option left, that wasn't me doing something to him. That was just the weight of what he'd done landing exactly where it was always going to land. Renee is finding her footing. That's the part that matters most to me. Not the apartment, not the trust, not any of it. Just that my daughter is asking better questions about her own life now than she was 2 years ago. That took courage. It's hard to look clearly at someone you love and see what's actually there, instead of what you hoped was there. That's not weakness. That's one of the hardest things a person can do, and she's doing it. I'm 63 years old, and I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Scottsdale with a balcony and a woodworking shop downstairs and more peace than I've had in years. I didn't get here by being hard or cold or vengeful. I got here by finally understanding something Patricia tried to tell me for 30 years, that your dignity is not a sacrifice you make for people you love. It's something you model for them. It's something you protect, not for your sake, but for theirs, so they know what it looks like. So maybe, someday, they protect their own.